The dusty attic air was thick with memories and the scent of old pine. Captain Eva Rostova ran a hand through her short-cropped hair, a faint sigh escaping her lips. Leave was supposed to be a respite, but sorting through her late grandmother's belongings felt like a different kind of battle. It was quiet, too quiet for a woman used to the constant hum of a military base. She reached for a final, nondescript cardboard box labeled Alexei, in her grandmother's elegant script. Her grandfather, the man she remembered as a gentle soul with paint-stained fingers, who spoke more about shades of blue than anything else. The box was lighter than she expected. Inside, nestled under a stack of faded landscape paintings, was something that didn't belong. A heavy, cold steel strongbox, its surface pitted with rust. There was no key. Curiosity, a soldier's instinct, flared within her. She fetched a screwdriver from the garage and, with a grunt of effort, pried the old lock until it gave way with a sharp crack. The hinges protested as she lifted the lid. Instead of the maps or art supplies she expected, she found 3 thick journals, their black leather covers cracked with age. They were wrapped carefully in an oilcloth, preserved with a reverence that felt out of place. She lifted the first one, its weight substantial in her hands. She opened it randomly, her breath caught in her throat. These were not sketches of trees and rivers. The pages were filled with precise, hand-drawn diagrams of terrain, complex ballistic calculations scribbled in the margins, and dense paragraphs of text in her grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. Her eyes scanned a page, her military mind automatically decoding the information. It was a sniper's log, a detailed account of windage, elevation, and target movement. Her heart began to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She turned to the front of the journal. The first entry was dated Chechnya, 1995, a place of brutal conflict she had only studied in textbooks. And there, beneath the date, was a call sign she had heard whispered in hushed tones by veteran instructors, a name spoken with a mixture of awe and mystery: the shepherd. The gentle artist, the man who taught her to see the beauty in a sunset, was a ghost. A legendary marksman whose methods were the stuff of myth, believed to be lost to history. A wave of disbelief washed over her, followed by a strange, cold clarity. Everything she thought she knew about her family, about herself, shifted in an instant. She was holding not just a journal, but a secret history. And in that quiet attic, Captain Eva Rostova realized her inheritance was not a memory. It was a mission she never knew she was being prepared for. The journal felt like a live thing in her hands, its secrets humming against her skin. Eva sat on the dusty attic floor for what felt like hours, not reading, just processing. The gentle grandfather of her childhood was now a phantom, a warrior etched in ink and memory. The calm of her leave was shattered, replaced by a low thrum of anticipation. She carefully rewrapped the journals in their oilcloth, her movements reverent. This was not something for prying eyes. This was a voice from the grave, speaking only to her. The shrill ring of her military issue phone cut through the silence like a gunshot. She answered, her voice automatically sharpening to a professional clip. Rostova. The orders were brief and urgent. Leave canceled. Report to base immediately for deployment. A situation was developing in the North Caucasus. The name of the region sent a jolt through her system. It was the same unforgiving terrain detailed in her grandfather's journals. This was no coincidence. It was fate. On the roaring military transport plane, crammed between dozing soldiers, Eva finally dared to open the second journal. The drone of the engines faded into the background as she fell into Alexei's world. His words were not just technical notes, they were a philosophy. He wrote of patience, of becoming part of the landscape, of listening to the silence between the shots. He described an enemy that was cunning, that used the mountains like a fortress, that employed tricks and deceptions. A specific passage made her blood run cold. He detailed the tactics of a particularly ruthless Chechen commander, a man who used false positions and civilian shields with brutal efficiency. The commander's nickname was the Mountain Fox. The plane lurched, and Eva looked out the window at the jagged peaks beginning to appear below. Her briefing packet lay unopened on her lap. She already knew what it would say. Intelligence indicated they were facing a new insurgent leader, a ghost who had unified several factions. His nom de guerre was Vulcan, volcano. But his methods, as described in the preliminary reports, were identical to the Mountain Fox's. It was as if Vulcan had found the same old playbook her grandfather had fought against decades ago. He was using the timeless, brutal strategies of the mountains, strategies that modern technology often failed to comprehend. Eva wasn't just reading history anymore. She was reading the enemy's mind. The unseen legendary sniper wasn't just her grandfather. He was now her tactical oracle. The weight of the journals in her pack felt heavier than her rifle. She had an advantage no one else on this plane could imagine. But it was an advantage born from a secret she could never reveal. As the plane began its descent into the war zone, Captain Eva Rostova was no longer just a soldier following orders. She was a student preparing for a final exam, with a ghost for a teacher, and the stakes could not be higher. The mountain air was thin and cold, biting at Eva's lungs as she lay perfectly still. Below, the narrow valley known as the Wolf's Jaw was eerily quiet. Her squad was positioned along a rocky ridge, waiting for the command to advance. Major Petrov's voice crackled in her earpiece, confident and clear. Drone feed shows the path is clear. Alpha Team, move forward. Secure the opposite ridge. On her tablet, the live drone footage indeed showed an empty, sun-baked trail. But something felt wrong. The silence was too complete. As Alpha Team began their descent, a line from her grandfather's journal flashed in her mind. Asterisk, the easiest path is always a trap. The land itself will warn you if you listen. Asterisk, she shifted her weight, pressing her eye tighter against the scope of her SV-98 sniper rifle. She scanned the opposite ridge, not where the drone was looking, but just below the crest, in the deep shadows of the rocks. And then she saw it, a flicker of movement. Not a man, but the subtle glint of sunlight on a lens. A spotting scope. The drone was looking at the obvious path, but the enemy was hiding in the dead ground, the blind spot. "Command, this is Falcon 2, Eva whispered into her mic, her voice tight. "I have a visual. Single sniper, 10 o'clock from the drone's position. They are baiting us." Major Petrov's response was immediate and dismissive. "The drone sees nothing, Rostova. Hold your position. That is an order." She watched in horror as Alpha Team moved further into the kill zone. She could see the hidden sniper adjusting his position, getting ready to fire. The rules were clear. Obey the command. Follow the technology. But the technology was blind. Her grandfather's voice was louder. Asterisk, a soldier's first duty is to her comrades. A machine has no soul to save one. Asterisk. It was an impossible choice. Court-martial or a body bag for her friends. There was no time. Eva took a slow, deep breath, exhaling halfway. The world narrowed to the crosshairs and the man in the shadows. She blocked out Petrov's angry voice in her ear. She calculated the wind, not from the digital readout on her scope, but by watching the gentle sway of a distant brittle bush, just as Alexei had described. It was a faint, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. She adjusted her aim a fraction of a millimeter. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The shot echoed through the valley, a single, sharp crack that shattered the silence. Through her scope, she saw the enemy sniper's rifle clatter against the rocks. A perfect disabling shot. Chaos erupted on the radio. Alpha Team, now aware of the threat, scrambled for cover. The ambush was broken. The immediate silence that followed was broken by Petrov's voice, cold and livid. "Rostova, stand by. You have some very serious explaining to do." The tension in the command tent was thicker than the mountain fog. Major Petrov stood with his back to her, his shoulders rigid with anger. The glow of the tactical screens painted his face in harsh, shifting colors. Disobedience in a combat zone is not initiative, Captain. It is mutiny. You risk the entire mission on a feeling. He turned, his eyes boring into her. How did you see what my drones did not? Eva stood at attention, her gaze fixed on a point on the canvas wall behind him. The journals felt like a lead weight in her pack, just outside the tent. To reveal them would be to invite even more suspicion, to be labeled a liar or worse. She gave the only safe answer. I observed a visual anomaly, sir. A glint of light. Standard sniper protocol. Protocol. Petrov scoffed, slamming his hand on the table. Protocol was to maintain your position. You are confined to base pending review. Dismissed. The walk back to the makeshift barracks felt like a mile. The other soldiers avoided her gaze. She was a pariah, a loose cannon. That night, huddled in her cot, the weight of isolation was crushing. She could still feel the ghost of the rifle's recoil in her shoulder. Had it been luck? Was she seeing patterns that weren't there, chasing a ghost? The curtain to her small space rustled. Sergeant Dmitri, her spotter, slipped inside. His face, weathered by 2 decades of service, was grim. He didn't speak at first, just handed her a steaming mug of tea. That was some shot, Eva, he finally said, his voice a low rumble. A 1 in a million shot. Through shadow and rock. I was your spotter, and even I didn't see the target until after you fired. Eva said nothing, sipping the bitter tea. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Dmitri leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. But I know a shot like that. My father, he served with a man who could make shots that defied physics. They called him the Shepherd. He said the man didn't just shoot, he could read the wind like a map and see the future in the shadows. He paused, his eyes searching hers. Petrov thinks it was luck. I think it was something else. So I'll ask you again, Captain. Where did you learn it? The directness of the question, the recognition in his eyes, broke her resolve. The secret was too heavy to carry alone. With a trembling hand, she reached for her pack and pulled out the first journal. She placed it in Dmitri's calloused hands. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting and diagrams. His breath caught. He traced the faded call sign on the first page with a look of pure awe. The Shepherd, he whispered, the name a prayer on his lips. He looked from the journal to Eva, understanding dawning on his face. Volkov, you are his blood. In that moment, the isolation vanished. She was no longer alone. She had an ally who understood that the greatest weapon they had wasn't in the armory, but right here, in these pages. The compound was a fortress, perched on a sheer cliff face. Every approach was a kill zone, covered by heavy machine guns. Major Petrov's face was a mask of frustration in the dim light of the command tent. A frontal assault is suicide. A drone strike risks civilian hostages. We have no viable options. The mood was bleak. Vulcan was untouchable, mocking them from his mountain throne. Eva felt the weight of the journal in her tactical vest. She had studied a specific entry, a route deemed the Serpent's Path, a near vertical ascent up a weather-worn rock face deemed impassable by modern military planners. It was a path for ghosts, not soldiers. She exchanged a look with Dmitri. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Sir, Eva's voice cut through the grim silence. I have an alternative. All eyes turned to her, skeptical. She laid out the plan with a calm she didn't feel, citing advanced topographic analysis of satellite imagery. She proposed a solo, 36-hour infiltration up the cliff face to a ledge that provided a direct line of sight into Vulcan's inner courtyard. Petrov laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. That cliff is a sheer wall, Rostova. It's a suicide mission. With respect, sir, the satellite data indicates sufficient fissures and handholds for a skilled climber. The enemy will never expect an approach from there. It's the one angle they won't be watching. The debate was tense. But with no other options, Petrov gave a grudging, grim approval. You have one chance, Captain. Do not make me regret this. The journey to the base of the cliff was a silent stalk through enemy territory. When she reached the bottom, the wall of rock loomed above her, disappearing into the darkness. It was even more daunting than she had imagined. Her muscles ached with a fatigue that was more mental than physical. Doubt whispered in her ear, "This is madness." Then she heard her grandfather's words, clear as if he were beside her. Asterisk, the mountain is not your enemy. It is your ally. It tests you. It tells you who you are. Asterisk, she began to climb. It was not a climb of speed, but of infinite patience. Each movement was calculated, each grip tested. She moved like liquid shadow, inch by agonizing inch. The world shrunk to the next handhold, the next tiny ledge for her boot. Hours blurred into a cycle of strain and focus. She fought through burning muscles and the terrifying void at her back, driven by the ghost of a man who had walked this path before her. She was not just climbing a rock face. She was climbing into a legend. The final pull over the ledge was a testament to pure will. Every muscle in Eva's body screamed in protest as she rolled onto a narrow, grassy shelf, hidden from the world below and above. She lay there for a long moment, gulping the thin, cold air, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done it. The serpent's path was no longer a story in a journal. It was a reality she had conquered. Slowly, she assembled her rifle, her movements automatic and precise despite the exhaustion. She inched forward until the compound's central courtyard filled her scope. It was a hive of activity. And there he was, Vulcan. He was taller than she expected, barking orders with an air of unchallenged authority. He was perfectly positioned. A slow, steady breath. The crosshairs settled on his chest. The shot was hers. It was the easiest thing in the world to apply the final ounce of pressure. But then a young fighter, no older than 19, ran up to Vulcan, handing him a radio. The boy's face was eager, earnest, looking at the commander with a mix of fear and admiration. It was a look she had seen on the fresh-faced recruits back at her own base. A memory, sharp and clear, erupted from the journals. Her grandfather's words, written after a similar shot he had chosen not to take. Asterisk, I saw my target. But I also saw the boy beside him, a boy who did not yet know the cost of the old men's wars. To kill the serpent is one thing. To poison the well for the next generation is another. A true warrior wins the battle before it is fought, by choosing which battles are worth the price of a soul. Asterisk. The shot was clear. The mission was simple. But the choice was suddenly, terrifyingly complex. Killing Vulcan would be a tactical victory. But would it create 10 more like him? Would that young boy, radicalized by a martyr's death, become the next Vulcan? Her finger rested on the trigger, frozen. This was the real test. The shepherd wasn't just teaching her how to shoot. He was teaching her when not to. The scope's view was no longer just a targeting system. It was a window into a moral abyss. She had to make a decision that would define not just her career, but her very soul. She waited. Her world reduced to the two figures in the circle of her lens, the weight of a legacy resting on a single, impossible choice. The moment stretched into an eternity. Eva watched the young fighter laugh at something Vulcan said, the innocence of the gesture a stark contrast to the violence surrounding them. Her grandfather's words echoed, a calming, steadying force in the storm of her thoughts. When the battle before it is fought, the mission was to stop Vulcan. There was more than one way to achieve that. She made her choice. Her finger moved away from the trigger. She adjusted her aim, her calculations now different. She focused on the radio in Vulcan's hand, a vital piece of equipment, a symbol of his control. She took a final, calming breath, exhaling slowly. The rifle shot cracked, a single, precise report that echoed off the mountain walls. Through her scope, she saw the radio explode in Vulcan's hand. The commander stared in stunned disbelief, clutching his stinging fingers. In that instant of shock and confusion, chaos erupted. His fighters, thinking they were under a full-scale assault, scrambled wildly, firing indiscriminately into the surrounding cliffs. Vulcan was no longer a leader. He was a target, exposed and vulnerable amidst the panic. A second shot, this one from a different direction, one of Petrov's other sniper teams, now seizing the opportunity, found its mark. Vulcan fell. The mission was accomplished, but the method was a mystery. Back at the base, the mood was celebratory, but for Eva, it was a tense wait. The summons to Major Petrov's office was inevitable. He stood behind his desk, the battle reports laid out before him. His expression was unreadable. The shot that took out the radio, Rostova. That was you. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. It was a clever shot. A surgical shot. It broke their command structure and allowed us to finish the job. He paused, his eyes narrowing. But it doesn't explain how you knew to take it, or how you knew to climb that cliff. Your file shows no advanced mountaineering training. Your initial psych eval suggests a tendency for rigid, by-the-book thinking. So, Captain, I will ask you one more time. Where did you learn this? Eva knew this was the end of a line for lies. Her career was over either way, for insubordination or for what would sound like insanity. She reached into her pack and placed the first, worn leather journal on his desk. She opened it to the front page, to the date and the call sign. Petrov's eyes dropped. He read the name. His stern face went pale. He reached out a hand, not to pick it up, but to gently touch the faded ink, as if touching a relic. His stern composure cracked, replaced by something akin to reverence. He looked from the journal to Eva, his voice a hushed, almost breathless whisper. Volkov, the shepherd. He looked back down, his finger tracing the handwriting. I studied his theories at the Advanced Command School. They said his personal journals were lost, that his methods were unteachable. He finally looked up at her, his gaze completely transformed. There was no anger, only awe. You are his legacy. 6 months later, the air on the training ground was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth instead of cordite and dust. A small group of elite reconnaissance soldiers sat in a semicircle, their attention fixed not on a drone screen, but on the woman standing before them. Captain Eva Rostova, no longer a pariah but a respected instructor, held a single, weathered journal in her hand. He wrote that a sniper's greatest weapon is not a rifle but patience, she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the quiet clearing. He believed you could hear the enemy's intentions in the silence, if you learned how to listen. She spoke not of complex algorithms, but of awareness. She talked of reading the language of the birds and the wind, of understanding the story the land itself was trying to tell. It was a philosophy of war that felt ancient and timeless. She walked among them, pointing out features of the landscape, showing them how to see the terrain not as a map, but as a living, breathing entity full of opportunities and dangers. She had merged her grandfather's profound wisdom with the best of their modern technology, creating a new, hybrid doctrine that made her students not just soldiers, but artists of their craft. Sergeant Dmitri stood at the back, a faint, proud smile on his weathered face as he watched her teach. The lesson concluded, and the soldiers dispersed to practice their stalks, their movements more thoughtful, more deliberate than before. Eva stood alone for a moment, watching them fade into the trees. She then turned and walked towards a quiet bench overlooking the valley. From her pocket, she withdrew a new journal, its pages blank and full of potential. She also held her grandfather's final, mostly empty journal. In it, on one of the last pages, he had written a single unfinished sentence. The true victory is not in the battle won, but in the wisdom passed on to. Eva uncapped her pen. She filled in the blank, not with ink, but with the certainty of her actions, with the lives she had saved and the students she now taught. The sentence was now complete through her. Then, on the first page of her own new journal, she began to write. The style was different, more modern, but the soul was the same. She was recording her own experiences, her own lessons learned, adding a new chapter to a legacy that had been saved from oblivion. The student had not just learned the lessons of the master. She had become one herself, ensuring that the unseen legend would never truly fade away.